Hey you guys, I just am coming here. These are the notes that I promised you that I would make. So we're just continuing. So these are slides. It's actually 19 through 37 are the slides from this video. So we're looking at the first few slides here. Neo-Freudians, those are our new Freudians, and projective tests and what those are and what they do and when we would use them. So one of our neo-Freudians is Carl Jung. Okay. Now, Carl Jung, he is known for this thing called the collective unconscious. And you're going to want to highlight that or underline that in your notes. Basically, the collective unconscious, it contains a common, he said, this reservoir of images that are taken from our past. Okay. So we've got that. And that's why many cultures share certain myths and images, such as mother as a symbol of nurture. So that's one of from one of our old units, the archetypes. Okay. Carl Jung also said that we all have this persona versus a shadow. And the persona is what we share with others. That's that part of our personality and the part of ourselves that we kind of open up to others and we let others see. The shadow portion of ourselves and the shadow portion of our personality, that's the part that Carl Jung said, that's what we keep to ourselves. We don't really let people in to see that part of ourselves. Okay, so that's Carl Jung. Then we have a guy by the name of Alfred Adler. Now, Alfred Adler, like Freud, believed in childhood tension. However, where they differed was that Adler said that the tensions were social in nature, whereas, as we know, Sigmund Freud says that the tension and those childhood things all go back to some sort of a sexual nature. He always referenced it back to something regarding sex, not the actual, action of having sex, but just some sexual nature with it. He said that a child struggles with this inferiority complex during growth and that kids strive for superiority. They strive for power. Alfred Adler is also known for studying birth order and how, depending on what your birth order is in your family, how that impacts our personality. So if I'm an older child, what does that generally mean about my personality? If you're that typical, you're that middle child, so how do you behave in that regard? Or are you the youngest? And then also, are you an only child? So he also studied that and how, depending on where you were born in your family's birth order, how that impacts a person's personality as well. Okay, another neo-Freudian is Karen Horney. It is not horny, it is Karen Horney. And Karen Horney, she was very similar to Alfred Adler, where she also looked at the social and the cultural aspects of childhood growth and development. She also countered Freud's assumption that women have. Remember how I told you guys back at the beginning of the year, Freud believed that women had this thing called penis envy, and that women have weak superegos and they just suffer penis envy. Karen Horney countered that and she was like, no, Sigmund Freud, women do not have penis envy. And she actually said, I believe that men actually have womb envy, where men are envious of women's ability to, because they have a womb, carry a baby and make babies. So Karen Horney and Sigmund Freud definitely had this sparring where they definitely disagreed with each other's viewpoints for sure. All right, so where do these projective tests come in? So, let me go back. So these people I just introduced to you, so our Carl Jung, our Alfred Adler, and our Karen Horney, these three people, these are our neo-Freudians. These are our new Freudian thinkers. So they took what Sigmund Freud came up with, they kept what they liked, they threw out what they didn't, because they still like the psychoanalytic approach. They're now more like the psychodynamic approach. They've just adjusted it, okay? So now we get into these projective tests. So how does one evaluate a person's personality? How do they get into your unconscious mind? Well, they said that by using projective tests, that would reveal what was hidden and what had been like pushed down or repressed into a person's unconscious mind. So we talked before where someone could, and it was one of way back, I won't go all the way back, but one of Freud's techniques was the free association, and that during his therapy techniques, he would just allow the person to say whatever came to mind, and that through that process of free association, they would ultimately expose, probably inadvertently, what was in their unconscious. Well, projective tests came about later, and they thought this would happen the same way. So there are two types of projective tests, and the first one is this TAT. It's the thematic apperception test. This was created by Henry Murray. And the TAT, it's a projective test where people express their inner feelings and they interpret and their interests through a story that they make up of some sort of ambiguous scene. So if we take this one here, I have done this in the past, and I wish we could be in class so we could like look at it and discuss it. But I've done it in the past, and so you've got a man. I'll try to zoom in here. So you've got a man who is laying in a bed. Okay, he's got an arm hanging off here, and there's like a blanket on him. Okay, and then there's a woman outside. She's like holding onto the doorknob there, and she's got her hand on her face. So this would be an example of a TAT. So you would have the person, this isn't the same video or same image, but this image would be given to this person. The doctor, the psychologist, would write down what he is explaining. Like, okay, what do you see? Tell me about what you notice. Tell me, what do you think's going on in this picture? And that's kind of how it starts. You just tell me what's going on here. Now, if this person says she's crying because her husband just died and she's devastated and she doesn't know what to do. Okay, so then that could expose something else. If she says she just walked in and she saw her husband had cheated on her, I don't know, whatever. Or her husband was drinking and he had been, sober for 15 years and he just started drinking, whatever. Okay, so depending on how the person is describing and making up this story of what they think is happening in the picture, that would then lead their therapist to go in and ask other kind of follow-up questions and potentially, hopefully, the goal, go into their unconscious. Okay, so that is our first projective test. Okay, the second one is the Rorschach ink block test. So Herman Rorschach came up with this. And so literally, this is really the most widely used projective test. It has 10 different ink blots that are, in a variety of forms. And so basically you would, again, what do you see in this image? So the person just shows the image, what do you see? And you're going to want to highlight this last part. So this is what it does. It seeks to identify people's inner feelings by analyzing their interpretations of the ink blots. What do you think this is? Maybe you say it's a butterfly. Maybe you say it's like a pelvis. Like this is like their hips and their pelvis. Okay, whatever. Maybe you think it's like an eagle and the legs of the eagle and it's coming down to like attack some animal here. Okay, so what does that tell us? What does that tell us about what you're going through? And so they would then analyze it further. Okay, All right, so let's look at some criticisms of these projective tests. Critics argue that projective tests lack both reliability, and you all must know the difference. You need to know what reliability and validity are, and you need to know how they're different. So reliability, write this down. It's that consistency of results. Will I get the same result if I do this time and time again? Okay, and validity. Is the test valid? And if I say yes, the test is valid, then it is predicting what it's supposed to. If I say the test is not valid, that means it's not predicting what it's supposed to. Okay, and so critics of the TAT as well as the Rorschach ink blot test, they say they're not reliable and they're not valid. That maybe they watched a movie last night and that image is something they saw in those ink blot things reminds them of something they saw or reminds them of something else. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's exposing what's in their unconscious. So that's why they're like, I don't think it's reliable and I don't think it's valid. All right, so another one is that even trained raters evaluating the same patient come up with different interpretations. So again, there lacks the reliability. It's not getting the same interpretation time and time again. And projective tests, they may misdiagnose a normal individual as like pathological. So there's the validity. Is it testing what it's supposed to? So those are the criticisms of it. All right, so if we evaluate the psychoanalytic perspective, so we have to look at some of this modern research. So personality develops throughout life, is not fixed in childhood. Sigmund Freud said, the first 5 years of people's lives, that's where your personality is developing. Modern psychoanalytic perspectives are neo-Freudians. They're like, nope, sorry, Freud, you're wrong. It's not fixed in that childhood. It's not that one minute window of time of a number of years that's where a person's personality develops. Does it develop during those years? Definitely, but it still continues on. Number 2, Freud underemphasized peer influence on the individual, which may be as powerful as parental influence. And so that's another big thing. Sigmund Freud really focused on the parent and what the parents and their interaction with their child and how that impacts how the child develops and how they will develop and function their entire life. But again, those neo-Freudians are psychodynamic or modern psychoanalytic people. They're like, peer influence is just as important, if not more important in some cases. So they're like, you can't just say parental or, it's just this, not that. They're like, no, it's a combination. And then the third one is gender identity may develop before 5 or 6 years of age. And this is something that Freud didn't think happened until later. And the neo-Freudians are now looking and saying, I think that this might happen a little sooner than Freud had said initially. Okay, some more. Number 4, there may be other reasons for dreams to arise than Freud's theory of wish fulfillment. You might be having a dream not because what you're dreaming was something, this deep, dark wish you had. It might just be you were just dreaming. Like, it doesn't have to always go back to something. 5, verbal slips. Those are those Freudian slips. We talked about those in the fall. These verbal slips, they can be explained on a basis of cognitive processing of verbal choices. You could just be, oops, like I misspoke or I didn't mean to say that. It does not mean that there is this deep underlying like, oh my goodness, you said this, so you love this person because you accidentally said that versus, whatever. Freudian slips, they're like, I don't think so. Okay, and then number 6, suppressed sexuality leads to psychological disorders. Sexual inhibition has decreased, but psychological disorders have not. Okay, and that's just, you can't argue with that. All right. All right, so if we're looking at this psychoanalytic perspective and we're looking back on what Freud said, Freud's psychoanalytic theory rests on that repression, that idea of repression, that defense mechanism of that those painful experiences that you deal with in life, that they are repressed, they are pushed down into our unconscious mind. Okay? The majority of children, Holocaust death camp survivors, battle-scarred veterans, they are unable to repress those painful experiences into their unconscious mind. It's very conscious to them. It is very much so in their present consciousness, their level of awareness. It is very much so there. And that's why we see people who have PTSD. Like, they're not pushing it down and not understanding why they have these feelings and urges and why they're afraid of it. They know why. It is very well, like, in their mind as to why they feel this way or fear, whatever. And so, again, just showing how there's some disagreement there. All right. Freud's theory has also been criticized on scientific merits. Psychoanalysis is meagerly testable. It's really not testable. Most of its concepts arise out of clinical practice, which are really this kind of after the fact explanation. So really, they just say, I mean, in psychology is a science. We've talked about that. And just the fact that these neo-Freudians really criticize, and they're really looking at, okay, so Sigmund Freud, you used to talk about and you used to look at patients in this way, but where is your scientific, like, backing? Like, they question his backing and his scientific evidence to support what he did. And they say it's lacking. Okay, so that's kind of our psychodynamic, our neo-Freudians, those new Freudians, and how they differed from Sigmund Freud and how they took what he started and then adjusted. And then also our projective tests. That was the TAT and the ink blot, the Rorschach ink blot. Okay, so last part of this video I want to talk about is the humanistic perspective. So this is going to be essentially, I think it's like module 56. So we have to look at humanistic theory and then the Rogerian, the Carl Rogers terms. So humanistic perspectives, you need to know when I say who are humanistic people, you need to automatically have Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow. Should those names pop in your head instantly. Okay, so humanistic perspective is rather new. It's kind of a 1960s type thing, and it's very fitting for if you think of like what was the mindset and the attitude during the 1960s, that generation. I think the humanistic perspective is very fitting for how people thought and their ideas during that time. So these people, though, they're disconnected with Freud's negativity, and they didn't like the behaviorist either because they thought that was just